The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Jefferson Elementary School's cafeteria, illuminating long tables and the faint smell of cereal and juice. Children laughed and chatted in clusters, a cacophony of energy and chatter that usually felt ordinary. But today, for Malcolm Carter, one of the country's most prominent black CEOs, this place held a different weight. Dressed in a tailored dark gray suit, polished shoes, and carrying a sleek leather briefcase, Malcolm moved with the calm authority that had earned him respect across boardrooms and financial institutions alike. Yet this was a new arena, a school cafeteria, a world filled with unpredictability and raw honesty. He entered the cafeteria confidently, expecting perhaps a few curious glances, but nothing more than the quiet curiosity of adults and children used to the spectacle of his reputation. His eyes scanned the room, searching for his daughter, Amara Carter, a bright and lively 10-year-old black girl. She was somewhere between tables, laughing and talking with her classmates. Malcolm's steps were measured, his presence commanding even in this informal space. The staff, upon noticing him, straightened instinctively, recognizing both the man's reputation and the quiet authority that accompanied his posture. As he took another step toward Amara, a sudden ripple of laughter caught his attention. At first, it was easy to dismiss. The cafeteria was alive with noise, after all. But then he heard it clearly, a group of white classmates mocking his daughter. The words were cruel, sharp, deliberate, and unmistakable. They whispered about her clothes, her lunch, and her mannerisms, mocking her in ways that stung even through the clamor of the room. Malcolm froze mid-step. The briefcase in his hand felt suddenly heavier. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing as he scanned the group of bullies. Amara, seemingly unaware of the full intensity of the cruelty, laughed nervously at their jabs, trying to maintain composure. But her shoulders slumped slightly, a subtle betrayal of the hurt she felt. The cafeteria seemed to shrink around Malcolm in that moment. The laughter, the whispers, the taunting, every detail hit like a dagger. He had built empires, negotiated billions, and handled crises that threatened entire industries. Yet here, in this room of 10-year-olds, he felt a surge of protectiveness so visceral it stole his breath for an instant. He took a deliberate step forward, slow and measured. Every officer, teacher, and student sensed the shift in energy. There was no shout, no aggressive motion, yet the room seemed to pause. Laughter faltered mid-word. The bullies instinctively straightened, feeling the presence of someone who did not tolerate disrespect. Malcolm's eyes met Amara's. She looked up, a mixture of surprise and relief flickering across her face. In that single glance, he communicated, "I see you, I understand, and I am here." It was a silent reassurance, but one powerful enough to embolden her, even as she remained unaware of what would come next. The bullies, sensing his authority, whispered nervously among themselves. Their taunts had assumed anonymity, a shield behind which they could laugh freely. That shield had just been shattered. Malcolm moved with the quiet precision that had defined his career. Each step, each subtle gesture was calculated, not to intimidate unnecessarily, but to assert the reality that disrespect, no matter the age or context, had consequences. A teacher approached nervously. "Mr. Carter, we can handle it." Malcolm's gaze swept past her, stopping the words. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, conveyed a silent message. This was personal. This was not an incident to be merely managed. It required resolution, clarity, and immediate acknowledgement of authority. He finally addressed the group of bullies, his voice calm, measured, but carrying the unmistakable weight of consequence. "Amara," he said softly, "is your classmate and she deserves respect. What you just said is unacceptable." The room fell into stunned silence. Even the other students paused mid-bite, sensing the magnitude of the statement. The bullies exchanged glances, unsure how to react. They had anticipated whispers, giggles, or even a teacher's mild rebuke. They had not expected the presence of Amara's father, a man whose reputation preceded him, whose authority was absolute, to step in calmly, deliberately, and assertively. Amara's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, she felt the full measure of support from her father. The cafeteria, A space she had always navigated with nervous caution now seemed smaller, controlled, and safe. Malcolm's calm yet commanding presence had stopped the room mid-step, not through aggression, but through the precision of authority. Every motion, every gesture, every word communicated power, protection, and accountability. The bullies, for the first time, understood that their actions would have consequences far beyond whispered jokes or fleeting laughter. The staff, initially unsure how to intervene, now aligned themselves instinctively with Malcolm's authority. The cafeteria, once chaotic, now felt structured and deliberate. Every child, teacher, and staff member sensed that respect had been redefined in that moment. And in that quiet pause, the lesson began. In the presence of true authority, cruelty, arrogance, or disrespect, no matter how small, could not stand. Malcolm Carter, the black CO, had silently recalibrated the power dynamics of the cafeteria in one measured, decisive moment, and nothing would be the same for those who had mocked his daughter. Malcolm Carter's gaze swept over the cafeteria, his eyes sharp and unwavering. He had already observed the bullies' smug expressions and the subtle reactions of the other students. He knew that public humiliation and disrespect could fester if unchecked, and he intended to ensure it would be corrected immediately. His presence alone had stopped the laughter midair, but the work had only begun. The bullies, now uneasy, whispered to one another. "He's her dad?" one muttered, eyes wide with disbelief. They had assumed they could mock his daughter without consequence, never anticipating that authority would arrive quietly, decisively, and in full force. Malcolm took a step forward, his polished shoes making no sound on the cafeteria floor, yet every movement radiated purpose. His daughter, Amara, watched him from her seat, eyes wide, her small hands gripping her lunch tray. Relief and awe mixed across her face. She had always admired her father's calm demeanor, but witnessing it in real time, right here, defending her, was transformative. "Enough," Malcolm said firmly, his deep, composed voice resonating through the cafeteria. Every child froze mid-motion, forks paused halfway to their mouths, and teachers turned, sensing the authority behind the simple command. The word itself was unadorned, yet it carried the gravity of absolute accountability. The cafeteria staff, who had initially been unsure how to intervene, now instinctively moved to stand near the bullies, a subtle reinforcement of authority. The principal, observing from the side, realized this was more than a routine disciplinary situation. This was a direct lesson in accountability and respect, delivered by a figure whose presence alone commanded compliance. Malcolm approached the bullies' table. His dark suit and calm composure contrasted sharply with their jittery, surprised postures. "You have chosen to disrespect your classmate," he said, his voice steady but cutting. "You will acknowledge your actions and apologize immediately. Failure to do so will result in consequences extending beyond this cafeteria." The words hung in the air like a warning. The bullies, caught between fear and embarrassment, hesitated. Their earlier confidence evaporated under the weight of his measured authority. The room was silent, save for the faint murmur of students who now watched attentively, realizing that an extraordinary demonstration of power was unfolding before them. Amara's eyes met her father's, a subtle nod passing between them. It was a silent acknowledgement. He had her back, and justice would be served. She felt a wave of reassurance wash over her, and a newfound courage blossomed within. She had been subjected to humiliation, yes, but now, with her father's authority present, she was empowered to witness and participate in the correction. One of the bullies tried to smirk, a last desperate attempt at defiance. "It was just a joke," he muttered under his breath. Malcolm's eyes narrowed slightly, the kind of subtle intensity that can stop someone in their tracks. A joke is only acceptable when no one is hurt, disrespected, or embarrassed. This was none of those things, it was malicious. His calm precision made it clear that excuses were irrelevant. The principal, sensing the situation escalating appropriately under Malcolm's guidance, stepped forward. "I will support the corrective actions outlined here," he said, his tone formal. Students and staff understood that the response was now official and sanctioned. The bullies' sense of security crumbled completely. Malcolm instructed the students to stand and face their peer. "Apologize," he commanded, his voice unwavering. One by one, the bullies muttered their apologies, their faces flushed with shame. Every student in the cafeteria bore witness to the correction, and the lesson became communal. Disrespect would not be tolerated. The staff, observing closely, realigned themselves with the lesson. Teachers subtly noted each student's behavior, ensuring that future incidents would be monitored. The cafeteria, once a chaotic arena of youthful energy, had transformed into a stage where authority, respect, and accountability were clearly demonstrated. Malcolm stepped back, allowing the natural order to settle. He did not gloat, he did not raise his voice, but his presence alone ensured that the bullies had internalized the consequences of their actions. Amara smiled faintly, proud and reassured, as she realized the power of measured authority and the protection provided by those who cared. As the lunch period continued, the cafeteria maintained a subdued, respectful atmosphere. Conversations were quieter, movements more deliberate, and laughter now tempered with awareness. Malcolm observed from a distance, satisfied that the lesson had been communicated effectively, decisively, and without unnecessary spectacle. The incident had not only defended his daughter but also reshaped the dynamics of the classroom, staff, and student body. Respect, previously assumed or overlooked, had been reinforced in a single, calculated intervention. Malcolm Carter, the Black CEO and protective father, had established a precedent. Authority exercised with calm, precision, and unwavering focus can achieve justice far more powerfully than anger or aggression ever could. The atmosphere in the cafeteria was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Malcolm Carter, the Black CEO, now stood near the center of the room, his posture calm yet commanding. His presence alone had silenced whispers, paused laughter, and frozen the bullies mid-step. Yet he was not done. The humiliation of his daughter, though momentarily halted, required a subtle but undeniable assertion of authority to ensure respect and order. The group of white bullies shifted uneasily, their previous smugness replaced by unease. Their laughter had vanished, replaced with whispered nervous glances and a growing awareness that the stakes were far higher than they had imagined. Malcolm's gaze swept across the room, noting every slight movement, every hesitant posture. Each child, teacher, and staff member sensed the weight of authority emanating from him, not through raised voices or dramatics, but through controlled presence and absolute awareness. Amara, seated at her table, looked up at her father with a mixture of awe and relief. She had always admired his poise and intelligence, but witnessing it firsthand in a public, tense situation was transformative. She saw the calm decisiveness in his eyes, the precise way he evaluated each bully's behavior, and the subtle movements that communicated authority without a single shout. In that moment, she understood what true power looked like: composed, unyielding, and strategic. One of the bullies, still attempting to regain some confidence, muttered under his breath, "It was just a joke." His words were met with a sharp, unflinching gaze from Malcolm. The CEO's eyes, calm but piercing, immediately halted any further mischief. The silent communication conveyed a single, undeniable message: excuses would not suffice, and consequences were already imminent. Malcolm's measured approach extended beyond his gaze. He signaled subtly to the cafeteria staff, ensuring they would intervene appropriately without causing further chaos. Teachers nearby adjusted their attention, observing not only the behavior of the students but also the strategic method by which authority was being exercised. The combination of Malcolm's presence and subtle staff alignment created a controlled environment where respect was unavoidable. He took a step closer to the bullies, slow and deliberate. "Respect is not optional," he said, his voice calm but resonant enough to carry across the room. "Your actions toward Amara were unacceptable. You will apologize to her now." The words were not shouted, they were deliberate, measured, and carried the weight of someone accustomed to commanding obedience through presence alone. The bullies, caught off guard by the precision and calmness of his authority, hesitated. They glanced at one another, unsure how to respond to a man whose authority seemed absolute yet unaggressive. Slowly, one of them muttered an apology, forced and awkward. Another followed, each word dripping with reluctant acknowledgement. Malcolm's gaze remained steady, ensuring sincerity without a trace of malice. The lesson was being delivered in real time. Disrespect carries consequences, and authority demands recognition. Amara's eyes shone with pride and a subtle relief. She had been vulnerable moments ago, but now she felt empowered and protected. The cafeteria, once a scene of chaos and mockery, had become an environment of structured order. Malcolm had not humiliated the bullies through loud confrontation or spectacle. Instead, he had used calm, strategic authority to restore balance and assert control. Every observer understood the hierarchy had shifted irrevocably. The cafeteria staff, observing carefully, adjusted their positions and behaviors. Their subtle realignment reinforced the authority structure without overt interference. Even students not directly involved understood that the CEO's presence established a precedent. Bullying, disrespect, and arrogance would meet immediate correction. Malcolm's intervention had created a ripple effect of accountability that extended beyond the immediate participants. As the lunch period continued, conversations were subdued and controlled. Children spoke more cautiously, utensils were handled with attention, and even the previously bold bullies moved with measured restraint. Malcolm remained standing, silently monitoring interactions. His daughter sat confidently at her table, bolstered by his presence, her posture upright and assured. This was a demonstration not only of immediate justice but of enduring lessons. Authority, respect, and composure can establish lasting behavioral correction. Finally, Malcolm signaled the staff to guide the bullies to their respective tables under supervision, ensuring the resolution was orderly. The subtle handling of the situation reinforced discipline and restored equilibrium without humiliation or theatrics. Every participant had witnessed a demonstration of calm but absolute authority, a lesson in both respect and the consequences of misconduct. By the end of the lunch period, the cafeteria had returned to normal operational flow, yet the atmosphere was unmistakably changed. Every child, every staff member, and every observing teacher understood that Malcolm Carter's presence had not only protected his daughter but had permanently reinforced a structure of accountability. The bullies had been corrected, Amara empowered, and the hierarchy of respect re-established in a way that would endure long after the lunch period ended. The CEO finally guided his daughter to the exit, his calm demeanor never wavering. Every eye in the cafeteria followed them as they left, silently acknowledging the power, precision, and authority he had demonstrated. What had begun as a moment of casual bullying had transformed into a lesson in respect, discipline, and the unmistakable power of calm, strategic intervention. Malcolm Carter had not just defended his daughter, he had taught everyone in the room a lesson they would not soon forget. The cafeteria had fallen into a tense quiet after the initial confrontation. Malcolm Carter, standing near the center, exuded authority without a single raised voice. His presence alone had shifted the atmosphere, but the lesson was not yet fully complete. The bullies, still uneasy, whispered nervously among themselves, attempting to assess whether defiance was possible. Each glance they exchanged betrayed both fear and a dawning realization. They had underestimated the man before them and the consequences of disrespect. Amara sat upright at her lunch table, her posture now confident, her eyes tracking her father with admiration and a subtle sense of empowerment. The black CEO's calm, deliberate movements communicated more than words could: protection, authority, and unyielding strategic oversight. Even the cafeteria staff sensed it. Their adjustments in posture and positioning reinforced the invisible command he held over the space. Malcolm took a measured step toward the bullies. "This behavior," he said softly but firmly, "will not be tolerated. Your words, your laughter, and your disrespect toward Amara have consequences." His eyes scanned the group, noting every hesitation, every shift in stance. The subtle gravity of his gaze caused some to shrink slightly in place, while others tried, feebly, to maintain their composure. One of the bullies attempted a whispered excuse. It was just a joke. The words were cut short by the CEO's piercing gaze. Without raising his voice, Malcolm's expression conveyed absolute disappointment and expectation. "A joke at someone else's expense is never harmless," he stated, "especially when it targets someone with dignity, intelligence, and self-respect. You will acknowledge your actions and take responsibility now. The staff quietly moved to supervise the situation, their subtle alignment amplifying Malcolm's authority. Teachers and aides, who had initially hesitated, now stood attentively nearby, ready to ensure compliance. Every subtle adjustment reinforced the hierarchy, respect was demanded, and defiance was untenable. The bullies, realizing that the casual arrogance which had empowered them for so long no longer held sway, began to offer reluctant apologies. One muttered a quiet, forced apology, followed by another, each phrase dripping with discomfort and awareness of authority. Malcolm's measured nod signaled acknowledgement, but not indulgence. The lesson was clear, and the accountability was immediate. Malcolm turned slightly, his gaze sweeping the cafeteria. Every student who had witnessed the incident absorbed the demonstration. Injustice could be confronted decisively, and authority exercised without aggression could still enforce accountability. The lesson extended beyond Amara and the bullies. It was a broader affirmation of respect, discipline, and integrity within the school environment. Amara's expression shifted from relief to quiet pride. The humiliation she had endured moments earlier was replaced with reassurance and empowerment. She saw clearly that protection and justice were enacted not through loud confrontation but through measured, strategic authority. Malcolm's calm control of the situation offered her a model of composure and confidence she would carry forward. The cafeteria staff and teachers began to adjust the room's energy subtly. Conversations resumed, but with a newfound respect for boundaries and conduct. Students now understood that words and actions carried weight, and that authority could be present in the quietest, most deliberate of gestures. Malcolm's influence extended even to those not directly involved, embedding lessons of respect and consequence across the room. Marcus, a teacher observing the scene, whispered to a colleague, "I've never seen someone command a room without yelling or raising their voice. He just exists and it's enough." The colleague nodded subtly, aware that they had just witnessed a masterclass in authority and subtle intervention. Malcolm finally guided Amara to stand and gather her belongings. "Come with me," he said gently, his voice steady, commanding yet protective. Students moved aside instinctively, creating a clear path, and the bully's expressions reflected the lingering weight of the lesson. No words were needed. The combination of observation, subtle staff alignment, and Malcolm's calm authority had communicated everything. As they walked toward the cafeteria exit, Malcolm allowed the bullies and staff a final moment to internalize the impact of their actions. The lesson had been delivered. Disrespect is intolerable, consequences are inevitable, and authority can be enforced without spectacle but with absolute clarity. Outside the cafeteria, the school's hallways seemed to echo the quiet gravity of the intervention. Students glanced at each other, whispering, while teachers ensured that decorum was maintained. The ripple effect of Malcolm's presence was evident in every careful step and measured word. By the end of lunch period, the atmosphere had fully shifted. Casual arrogance among students was replaced by awareness. Staff moved with precision, and Amara, empowered and reassured, now understood the full measure of her father's authority. The cafeteria, once chaotic and filled with casual misbehavior, now reflected order, discipline, and respect, all enforced without a single shout or raised hand. Malcolm paused briefly outside the cafeteria doors, watching the staff and students realign naturally with the lesson imparted. Every subtle gesture, every adjustment in posture, every whispered acknowledgement reinforced that respect had been restored and authority asserted permanently. He had defended his daughter, restored equilibrium, and communicated a universal lesson in calm, strategic power. In that quiet, tense moment, the message was unmistakable. Authority, composure, and decisiveness could transform disorder into order, embarrassment into accountability, and defiance into lasting respect. Malcolm Carter had not only protected his daughter but had ensured that the principles of respect and justice would resonate throughout the school long after they had left the room. The cafeteria was silent, yet charged with an energy that made every observer hyper-aware. The earlier confrontation had shifted the power dynamics permanently. Malcolm Carter, the black CO, stood calmly near the center, his posture impeccable, his gaze precise. Every officer, staff member, teacher, and student could feel the invisible weight of his authority. The bullies, who had dared to humiliate his daughter, were now visibly shaken. Amara, seated at her table, watched her father with awe. The terror and discomfort she had felt moments earlier had been replaced with relief and pride. She now understood the depth of her father's presence and the subtle precision of his authority. His calm composure had delivered justice without a single dramatic outburst. Malcolm stepped forward toward the group of bullies, each movement deliberate, measured, and slow. "You have learned your first lesson today," he said, voice calm but resonant, commanding attention without force. "Respect is not optional. Humiliation, mockery, and disregard for others will have consequences, immediate and long-lasting." The bullies' faces paled. Their whispered excuses faltered and died under the weight of his gaze. One muttered, "We didn't mean," but Malcolm did not flinch. His eyes, steady and piercing, silenced even the faintest hint of defiance. "Intentions do not erase impact," he replied quietly, yet each word struck with undeniable authority. "You will issue a full apology to Amara here and now." One by one, the bullies spoke, hesitant and awkward, their voices trembling. The apologies were reluctant, forced, but undeniably delivered. Each word reinforced the lesson that Malcolm's authority was absolute, and their behavior had consequences beyond mere embarrassment. The staff, previously hesitant, aligned themselves with his presence. Teachers subtly guided the students, ensuring compliance and reinforcing the hierarchy that had been quietly, yet irrevocably, established. Every glance, every gesture, every movement in the cafeteria reflected the shift in power. Malcolm had transformed a chaotic moment of disrespect into a structured, enforceable lesson. Amara's face reflected pride and relief. The humiliation she had suffered had been corrected, and her father's calm yet commanding presence had demonstrated to everyone in the cafeteria the consequences of defiance. She realized the true meaning of authority. Control need not be loud, yet its impact can be total. Malcolm then addressed the entire cafeteria, his voice carrying just enough to command attention without raising. "Let today serve as a reminder, actions have consequences. Disrespect is unacceptable, and accountability is non-negotiable. Learn this now, and you will carry it forward." Every student, from the youngest to the oldest, understood. The bullies, visibly shaken, now fully realized that their behavior had crossed a line. Even those not directly involved were forced to acknowledge the authority Malcolm wielded silently yet unassailably. The principal, observing from the side, stepped forward. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he said, his tone formal yet filled with admiration. "Your intervention has clarified the expectations for conduct and respect within this school." Malcolm's subtle nod acknowledged him, reinforcing the principle. Authority, when exercised with composure and precision, commands universal recognition. Throughout the afternoon, the cafeteria maintained a controlled, respectful atmosphere. Conversations were subdued, movements measured, and even casual interactions were tempered by the awareness of what had transpired. The ripple effect of Malcolm's presence ensured that the lesson endured, extending beyond the immediate incident to the larger student body and staff. As lunch concluded, Malcolm guided Amara to the exit. Students parted respectfully, some casting glances of awe and curiosity. The bullies followed behind, subdued, aware that the power dynamic had permanently shifted. The lesson had been communicated clearly, publicly, and effectively. Outside the cafeteria, in the bright sunlight of the schoolyard, Malcolm allowed himself a subtle exhale. His daughter, walking beside him with confidence newly instilled by the morning's events, glanced up at him with pride. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered, understanding that his intervention had been both protective and educational. Malcolm looked down at her, calm and composed, yet proud. "You handled it well too," he said, acknowledging her resilience. Authority is not only in those who enforce it, it's in those who understand it and respect it. In the hallways, staff and students began to discuss the events quietly. The bullies, subdued and humiliated, were escorted to the principal's office for further disciplinary action, ensuring that consequences extended beyond immediate acknowledgement. Their friends, witnesses to the event, understood that any future defiance would be met with the same level of precision and authority. The cafeteria, once a scene of chaos and disrespect, now reflected order, respect, and awareness. Malcolm's presence had not only restored dignity to his daughter but had ensured that accountability, justice, and authority were unmistakable. The subtle precision of his intervention left a lasting imprint on everyone present. By the time the school day ended, the ripple effect of the morning's events had been fully realized. Staff and students aligned their behavior with the expectations set, conversations reflected attentiveness and respect, and the bullies had internalized the lesson. Malcolm Carter, the Black CEO, had demonstrated that authority exercised with calm, strategy, and precision could not only prevent harm but also transform the environment, teach a permanent lesson, and restore dignity without ever raising his voice. As he and Amara exited the building, the sunlight reflected off the polished floors, highlighting the composure and power that had defined the morning. The lesson was complete. Respect, accountability, and authority were absolute. The cafeteria would remember that day, the children would carry its lesson, and the bullies would never forget that their actions had consequences far greater than they could have imagined. Malcolm paused at the exit, looking back one final time. The students went about their day with a new awareness, the staff maintained order effortlessly, and the bullies, humbled and subdued, understood that authority, when wielded with calm precision, was absolute. And in that moment, the Black CEO had not only protected his daughter, he had permanently instilled a lesson in respect, discipline, and accountability, ensuring that justice had been delivered with strategy, composure, and undeniable authority.